All right.
Let's give it up for Berto!
Okay, so I'm going to talk about Vuex. Oh, did I start recording? Yeah, I did. Vuex, a state management pattern library for Vue.js. So it's kind of like taking Redux and Vue, putting it together in its own way. Before I start, a little about myself. As of today, a lead instructor here at Galvanize. Thank you. Yeah, you can call me Berto, and I love Vue. What you should know about me. I really do like it. I've been starting to get into it, and the things that they're doing, it's kind of cool. Taking like the best of the new world of front-end frameworks. So we'll see that with Vuex, how they're taking their own version of Redux and kind of taking the best of the world. So why Vuex? Why Vue and Redux? That's what I'm going to talk about. Start with, and then I want to go into more of an introduction of Redux. So if you don't know what Redux is, I'll talk about that, and also more in the lens of the Vue way that they're doing Redux. I'll talk about state and store, mutators, reducers, actions, dispatchers, getters, and modules. So if none of that makes sense, it will by the end of tonight, hopefully. I'll talk about the app architecture and other helpers like mappers I found very helpful. And then, of course, I'll throw in my opinion at the end about Vuex versus Redux, Flux, and React and all that stuff. Because I worked a lot with React, and it's a cool perspective. So let's get started. So why should you care about Vuex? Well, Vue is awesome. I thought I'd throw that in, but you already know. That's why you're here. So let's talk about Redux. Why is Redux awesome? So I really like Redux. Let's start with state. Does anybody know what this is?
Colorado.
It's Colorado. It's the state of Colorado. Thank you. But that's the wrong state. We're talking about a different state here. We're talking about the data in your application, like what defines what kind of data is displaying and stuff like that. So I have examples here, like think about Facebook, right? What kind of state does it have? Well, it has the image of the person, it has a name, it has the background image, it has like the notifications, the friend requests, it has all this stuff. That's the state of the application right there, right? So another application, Discord, right? It has a state. There's like a desktop app. It has like a state that is happening. It has the channels you're in, maybe the teams or whatever they're called. It has like different like voice channels. It has which one you have currently checked. So if you think about the state of your application, when you click a different channel, it changes the state of this part. Like this component changes this component. That's happening with the state, the communication between that, right? And same with this side thing right here. So if you think about making this happen, there's a lot of communication between components and the state of your application. So it's not easy by itself. So why Vuex? It is not required. You can build large applications without it. There's many things out there like event bus, observables that you can create. It's a lot of things that you can make happen, but at the end of it all, I really recommend Vuex for managing this. So it's great for maintaining state, communicating between components, and also for large applications. So if you think about starting a project and it's not going to be that big, I think it's still good practice to do it in just thinking of being able to scale it in case it needs to. It might not be good because it's a lot to get started. I think we made the joke of React of like, can I start coding React yet? Like it's the same idea with this. Like to set it up, it takes a while. So like, can I just make Vue happen? Like no, you need to set this up, all these things. It's the same idea with this. Like there's so many files that you need to create. So that is really the downside, but it's up to you. So hopefully now I got you bought in. Let's talk about Redux. So what makes Redux? The biggest thing is the store. This is the state. This is what contains your state. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a bunch of dinosaurs. I went dinosaur theme, so this is your container, your store. There's a bunch of dinosaurs in there. But that's the store. Also, I'm going to do a demo. So I'll start with kind of making this happen. We have an application here. It's very, very simple. So actually, I'll do a demo first. We have a little dinosaur here. And we can increase the age of him. And as we increase it, it becomes bigger, right? And we can reduce it. So what's the code that's making this happen? So we have a Vue application here. we have our index, basic layout. This is the container, the div that's going to make it, the application show. And then we have the main app. This is where we create the view and we render the component counter. Call it counter because you're counting the thing. And so we have the dinosaur here. So this is all the code that's happening. We have an increment function that when you hit it, it increases the age of the dinosaur. And when you hit decrement, it decreases it. And we have the data that starts at the age of 10. Cool. Very simple, basic application of Vue. What we're going to do, we're going to take this and add Redux to it. You're going to see how it kind of like enterprisey it feels, because like you're making all these things happen, these extra files to like do the same thing that I was doing with this little code. But again, you might see the payoff later on. So if we're starting with this, this is sort of what we see right now. This is the application flow, and this is what you should think about Redux. You have the view, which is the little dinosaur. You hit a button, it throws an action, changes the state, and you change the view. That little cycle. That's what's happening, right? What we're going to do with Redux, we're going to complicate it. We're going to kind of see the same thing right here, where we have the view, what's happening. You see an action, changes the state, and kind of does a cycle, but there's more components in between. And that's what's going to happen. So first thing that we want to do, let's go ahead and add a store. That's what we wanted to do. So let's add a store file, and in here we're going to create a store. So let's import Vue. Let's do Vue from Vue, and let's also import Vuex from Vuex. Now, to get started with Vuex, you simply just use it. You do use for Vuex. So you do use Vuex. And then what we want to do first is just create a store. To do that, let's export it because we're going to put it into our application. Import default new Vuex store. And then in here, it takes an object that takes a lot of properties of Redux. For now, we're just going to start with a state. So it's going to take a state from us. Let's just define the state to be the age of 10, kind of like we had before. Right? So now we're creating a store with a state of it. What we can do is import it into our application to use this store. So we can do import store from store, and then we can include it right here. Cool. So now our application has this store in it. Again, if we go back to this is what our store looks like. We're including Vuex, we create the state, before that we add it to our Vue application, and then we export it out. We export out a new store, and then we include that store into our Vue application. Right? Cool. So now we can use this. How can we use this? Well, let me close this windows. In our counter, we can reference it. We can, when we increase, let's just increase the state of the application. Now we can access it by funny Angular like syntax with the $. We do that state, that age, plus plus. And we can do the same thing here. Now we can reference it this way. Yes, it's a terrible practice, and I'll go into that. Yeah, you should not be doing this. I just wanted to do like little bit by little. So right now we're just dealing with the store. Yeah, this is terrible practice. You do not want to modify the store directly. But what we're doing, we're referencing directly the store from here, from the application, which is really cool that you can do. It's like, you can do whatever you want. Bad practice. Perfect. Oh, and then since we're referencing the store, the state of the store, we no longer need this data. Like this. Cool. And cool. Ah, first try. Sweet. Let's see if we can make it through without opening the console. I don't know if that's possible, but sweet. So now we added Redux or Vuex, pretty much. We have a store, but this is terrible practice, as it was pointing out. The whole point of Redux is it follows that philosophy. So there's more parts to it. We just added a store to it. So our state instead of being this this data for the component right here, this data is shared through all the components. That's part of Redux. You have one centralized location for all your application, one state. It's not shared between components. No, it lives in one place, and that's what we're doing. We're holding the state in the store. Cool. So let's keep going. We have mutators. We have dinosaurs here that are mutating into badass dinosaurs. And we also have Vue mutators, which is the only way you should change state in the Vue store, which is not what we were doing, but this is what we're going to add. So we're going to add mutators. You can think of them as events, kind of like events that are happening. What we saw here in the counter, these are the events, right? We're increasing, decreasing. They should be mutators. That's what we're going to do. We should not be modifying it directly. If you come from React, I don't know how many of you have experience with React and Redux, you might be thinking, wait, what about reducers? There's no reducers in the Vuex world, which is kind of cool, kind of not. I don't know. It's kind of confusing, depending on how you feel about Redux. Because the idea with reducers is that you don't change the state. You simply take what the state is and you give back some sort of like the new change, and then it applies all those changes. So reducers are pure functions. There's none of that here. You actually in Vuex, it tells you to mutate the state with the mutators, which is different practice. In Redux with React, it says like you probably get errors if you're trying to mutate the state. It's like, oh, your things aren't changing. You probably try to change the state. Don't do that. And I think that's why Vuex is calling them mutators, because it actually wants you to do that. So let's go and implement it. So what we want to do basically is take these guys out and call our mutators. So I'll just go ahead and create them here. We can do const mutators equals, and then here we can have a bunch of functions in here. It's pretty nice, to be honest. With React, trying to create reducers, you have to create them all, and then you have to combine all reducers together. Here's just simply an object, and you can add them all together. So what we can do is, let's grab all these guys and put them in here. And this is kind of what we want them to do. We want them to change the store, to change the state, to increase or decrease the age. And I believe the store comes in from here. Cool. So now we've defined two mutators, increment and decrement, and we can include them into the store here. Cool. I'll leave it up. And then in here, we can now call those mutators. In here, we can go ahead and use the store, and we can, I believe, is commit, and then the name of the mutation thing, increment, like so. Cool. So you kind of see what's happening here, where in our application, we have these events that are calling the mutators. So you have the mutators, these are the actual ones that are able to change the state. This is kind of like the better practice for it. One thing I'm kind of curious about is if this is the actual syntax for it. I wasn't sure if you do pass store thread, so we'll figure it out here. Now we can read the docs and see what happens. It says mutation type increment. It's not finding it. But this is the mutation. Who? Jump ropes. At 7:30 in the night is my question. Let's go to mutations. I think I should have called them mutations instead of mutators. Yeah. I think that's my fault. Here. Mutations. Let's try this one more time. And now, what we're missing is the proper syntax for state. It was just state. We didn't need to use the store. So in here, we just needed the state. So this is state. And that's it. Right. So you have the mutations who have access to the state, and you can do whatever you want with the state, and you mutate it. Again, with Redux, with React Redux, it would ask you to return a different version of the state that you wanted, which is not what we want to be doing. It just makes more sense to mutate it however you want.
Use an example of passing that data. Like
Yeah.
If you want to change it by 2 instead.
Yes, I'll show you later on payloads. Yeah, that's a good point. One thing I wanted to mention with mutations, there are mutation types, which is more like what's considered better practice. So what you would have, instead of having just the increment text here, you would have types that you would define. So you would do something like const increment equals increment. And it's just defining constants for the types of mutation. So you would use that instead of this right here. So you do increment. Using ES6 feature where it takes the variable as the key for it. You do the same here. So we decrement if we were to define it. This is just better practice that you'll see using Redux. They just want you to define the types as constants. Like so. And then you will have to do the same thing here, so it's kind of tedious, but we'll change this in a second. This is not actually how you do Redux. Cool. Any questions so far? Okay. So just if you see this, if you ever see like this constants that are being declared, like why are they doing that? It's just kind of a proper, like better practice of defining the mutation types. In Redux for React is action types. So let's talk about actions. We have a super sweet dinosaur in a laser action battle. But this is actions is the way you should be committing mutations. So the way we did it here, and I'm sorry if it's kind of annoying that we're doing it the wrong way every time before we do it the right way. You shouldn't be calling your mutations straight this way. You should be calling actions for them. So actions are the proper way to call mutations, and they are ideal for async operations. So if you're thinking like, okay, yeah, sure, you can go ahead and increment it, but what if it was going to a database and then storing the information, then when it comes back, you increment it? This wouldn't work with mutations right away. You would need actions for it. So, yeah, and then we'll go into payloads with actions. But let's add some actions. It's kind of the same idea here. Let's add some actions. So const actions, and you can define the list of actions. So you would think, well, we'll probably want an action for each mutation, and that's exactly right. In this case, it's kind of weird to think. Well, it seems like extra work. Why are you declaring more? Let me finish this. Why are you declaring more functions to call other functions? It doesn't make sense for this simple statement. But imagine this was doing some sort of other operation, more complex operation. It wasn't just incremented by one. It was doing something more. We can do this right here. So say we wanted to increase the age of the dinosaur. We wanted to do that after, say, like a second. So let's kind of like pretend as if we were doing a database call or something like that. Stick to ES6. And let's do half a second, like that. And I'm actually going to do the same thing for this one. Decrement, like that. That looks good to me. So now what we're doing is, the action is going to call the, and this one I remember, it's context, is going to call the mutation. So it can do context that commit, and it's going to call the mutation, and the mutation is increment here. let's call it a store. It's basically a store, just like whatever context you're in. I'm trying to think why I saw in the, I don't know, maybe it's just because you can have different stores when we talk about modules. I'm not exactly sure why they prefer context in the tutorial thing or in the docs. But what we have here now is we have actions that would increment and decrement. And what they'll do is after half a second, they're going to commit the mutation, which is the title of it, which is increment, and then that will change the state. So now, to call this, we'll go to our application, and we no longer need to commit. We need to dispatch an action, increment. So you see the difference. So like commit is to commit a mutation, to change directly the state. Dispatch calls an action, which is going to do some logic, could be an API request or anything like that, and then that's going to commit the mutation. So we'll do something like dispatch and decrement. And the names of this, decrement and increment, are just simply the name of the action. So that makes it easier too. So now you're not using constants, you're just naming it whatever name it has. So now that we define the actions, again, we just add it to a store, actions, go, and see if it works. Sweet. But notice how it's taking like half a second, right? Because we have some sort of delay on it, like, right? And that's the benefit. You cannot do this just by directly manipulating. That's one of the biggest benefits of actions, that you can have some sort of logic there, some asynchronous process. And when you finally commit, like inside the promise, whenever it is when it actually will happen, right? Yeah?
So is store a reserved word that Vuex knows refers to that object of the store that you're dealing with?
It's simply the first argument. If you're talking about this one right here, yeah. It's just it's really like the store right now. Yeah.
How is that store argument tied to anything?
It's right in here. We are using this actions, the definition, like this object that we define with the methods in it. That's what we're passing in here. And when we pass it in here, when we create a new store with those actions, it ties it to it. Right? So this is what happens. So then when we do this as store at dispatch, it knows we're trying to call an action by and it looks at this methods that we have in here. And this is the name of the key, which is increment or decrement in there.
So that part I get. What I mean is the actual argument that you're passing into increment,
right.
The one that you called store there.
Yeah.
How is that argument bound to anything? Or is that a reserved word that specifically refers to the store?
We can call it whatever we want. We can call it like context.
Vue is handing that to
yeah.
us when they call it.
Exactly. Right here, when we define it, Vue defines what that is, which is pretty much the store.
And you understand, there's no context at that point. It's like I'm referring to myself here,
yeah.
And I'm passing you call whatever you want. The first argument will do that.
Yeah, you're essentially just defining functions that it's going to call within itself. Yeah, kind of callbacks and stuff. Yeah.
Is that what we're setting on this .store.dispatch? Is that where it's being set, or?
This is where it's calling. So when you dispatch something, you dispatch an action, so it looks into the action object for that name of it. Yeah. Cool. So we're almost there actually to build a full Redux store. There's a few things I want to talk about. One is payloads, which is if you want to pass additional data to your action. So right now what we're doing is just dispatching an action, but what if you want to pass some more information to it? So like, say you're making an API call where it adds a user and you want the ID, you want to pass that through, you can do, it's the concept of payloads, which is passing data to the action, which as a second argument you pass an object with whatever you want. We can do that by adding another button here. So maybe we do increment. So maybe we'll add 10 years to the dragon. We'll say like he's drinking, and that would add 10 years to the dragon, right? To the dragon, to the dinosaur. So every time he drinks, that's it. So we'll do something like this, and we'll say increment. We'll kind of call we'll say drink. We're gonna call the same I think this will work, actually. We'll call this same action, but we'll pass it payload. Right? So here we'll say something like years or something like that. So if we'll do something like, we'll pass in the years in here, and then in here, we'll do a little logic. So like if years, else, let's do that. So if years, we're going to increase the age plus equal years. Right? So we're passing the years through the dispatch function. We'll call the mutation with the years. And if there's years involved, we'll add them to the year. If not, we'll just increment by 1. Think that might work? This is completely just trying out. Hey, there's drink. Yes, let's keep drinking. That's great. But yeah, that's payloads. So you can pass data through it. Cool. That's really much it. So there's a lot of other things that Vuex has that Redux doesn't. React Redux doesn't have built in. So one of the things is getters. You see this little dragon trying to get the berries? It has nothing to do with that, but it has something to do with the getters where you're. If you think about your state application, so in our application, the state is the year of the dragon. What if we wanted to get that in a certain format? Like, what if we wanted to get that in Roman numerals or something like that? And we did that in multiple components. Instead of having to do that logic every time, we can define getters will do that for us. So we just define it once. Like, this is an example with a to-do, right? Where you have, I just want to, give me the to-dos that are done. So you define this, and then all you have to do is just call this getter, and it will tell you that exactly. It's sort of like shorthand. It's cool that this is built in to Vuex. With Redux, you have to add in a library to be able to do this kind of stuff.
Do you call it like a property like that?
Getters, yeah. So you can define it in your store. You can have, kind of like we're doing here, we have an object of methods. You would define it and add your getters in there.
And then when you use it in your view, are you using this .store .getters?
No. Oh, that's a great question. It's computed. It's a bunch of computed methods that you would have. Yeah. Yeah. Computer methods just like have some extra logic added to them. But yeah, you would define it that way. We can do that, but I just, for the sake, I don't think it's, you can play around with it. The other one is modules, which is, if you think after you build the application, you have one store. So this is our store right here. And this is simply dealing with that little dragon, right? It's, can I say like, oh, it's already 50 lines for that little dinosaur. It kind of gets to be a lot, but if you imagine an application where you have multiple, the kind of like when you're using Redux, you want to have a single tree. So you have everything that goes back to one store. So if you want to have multiple stores, you can kind of define them as modules. And here's an example. We have module A with the state, mutations, action getters, module B with whatever it has. Then when you define your store, you can define different modules. And that way you can kind of combine multiple stores in one. Again, you would only do this when you have a lot of stores and like you kind of want to organize your application a little better. But in that sense, it's really easy to refactor. Like you can just start building your application like Vuex with one store and like, oh, I'm starting to do this a lot and adding a lot of things, kind of separate it. I'm going to make that a store, this is a store, you can import them both as modules. Done. Cool. So these are two things that Vuex has kind of built into it. You have a question?
Well, is there some efficiency there with separating them out?
Well, it follows more of the everything in your application, anywhere you go, will have the same state. Will kind of like reference the same state. So if you have multiple stores where they kind of have different state, you combine them so you can still access, any component can access the state of any other component. And that's sort of the idea, where you combine different stores that have different state into one so everybody shares the same state. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So even though they're separated in the code, it looks separated, like these are completely different things, you can have one store that completely encompasses all. Yeah. Cool. So app architecture. You can kind of see here, I just got this from their site where they recommend, your components in your tone file, your store to have everything different with the modules. But let's do that really quick. I think we can separate this a little better. Personally, this looks pretty bad, like having everything in one file. So what we want to do is first add a components file and move this counter to it. So we'll do components. So it's inside of there. And then also we want to, if we follow sort of this thing, we have a store in its own different file. So let's do that. And let's move our store into it. So now we have our store into its own little file, and then we have components there. And then now in here, we want to go ahead and add like actions. We want to add our mutations, not mutators, as I did. And then, oh, the types. Mutation types. Right? So now we have more of a proper structure. So let's just move everything in there, and then we'll wire it up, make sure everything works. So we'll get this guy in there, like that, and then we can just do export default. We can get rid of all this stuff, like that. So now we're just exporting this. And you'll notice how we're using the types in here. So we'll probably want to define it. So we'll do import, increment, and decrement from mutation types, like so. So now we're importing these two types from our mutation types. So that one's done, hopefully. We'll do the same idea with mutations really quick. So in mutations, we'll add this guy's export default. And again, you see that we're using the type. So actually, I'm going to be super lazy and grab them from here. Sweet. So that looks good to me. And now our page looks a little bit simpler. Let's grab this guys and put them into its own file. Export default. All right, so now we have our mutation types in some file. We have our store with a state, kind of simply put. We have our mutations in some file, and then we have our actions. So let's go ahead and import it all in. So we'll do import actions from actions. We'll do the same with mutations. And am I missing anything? I think this looks good. We might have to change the app. This is coming now from components, and this is coming from store. But let's call this index.js. Cool. So now you see kind of like a better organized. Like you see the store looks pretty simple. You have your mutation types, you have your mutations, and this is kind of what I was talking about. Like, oh, let's implement Redux. Now you have to create like 100,000 files. Like if you want to add an action, like if you want to have some sort of event, well, you need to create a mutation, then you need to create an action that kind of communicates to it, and you need to add the path. Like it's a lot of work to kind of do simple tasks that you were before. So if you look at the code that we have, how is this helping us? Like first, let's see if it works. It should know that I'm referencing the index.js from store. Well, I think I can troubleshoot this in a second, but I think I want to make my point more importantly than this. This should work, but because why not? Interesting.
mad about the way you're exporting that instead of being an object?
I think it's this. Export, is it export const? Yeah, I think that would do it. You want to export const. Hey. Sweet. So, if we looked at the code that we had before Redux and now we look at the code that we have now, it is insane to think this is more efficient, but it is. It's a better organized system that you have for your application. Now, if you wanted to scale it, it would be really easy to place and have a home for all the things. There are other things that they recommend, like a home for your APIs and things like that, but you can take a look into it. Other things like mappers. This is pretty cool. You can map actions and getters, so you don't have to define them all, since it's just kind of what they are. So like if we wanted to map actions, notice how we could just call the methods be the map actions. So in here, in our application, we can map, instead of defining all the actions here, we can map them directly. I would do it, but we don't have a drink action, so it wouldn't work. But that's another thing that you can play around. All in all, let me just give the last thoughts of Vuex versus Redux, Flux, and React and stuff like that. First, does anybody know the difference between Flux and Redux? Cool. They're thrown around a lot in the same thing, but like you can think of Flux as sort of like the concept or the idea that we're having one store and then we have actions that dispatches changes to the store and kind of have that cycle. That's the idea. The implementation is Redux. That implementation was made really strong by React. And that's where you see a lot of, if you go to like the React docs, the Redux, they have an example, everything's in React because they're the ones that made it popular. So it's really cool to see Vue kind of implementing it. But I really love, compared to like the way that React does it, it's kind of like they learned from the way that React was doing it and they implemented their own things. They're like, why do we need a third library for this? Like, if you wanted to do API calls with Redux, you have to implement like add thunks. You're like, what the hell is thunks? Like, that's another barrier if you wanted to learn and like do it. And it's adding a lot more work. Like the fact that it has getters and modules like built into it is super easy and like friendly to use. I personally really like it. And the last one that like my favorite is the concept of mutators. You don't only have reducers. Reducers, you couldn't mutate the state, but that's basically what you wanted to do. So why couldn't you just do it? And that's what Vue is like, no. It basically, what we want to do is mutate. So why don't we just mutate and like get rid of this functional programming sort of ideology. Like, it seems a little silly. So I really do like what Vuex is doing over React Redux, but I really love what they did to kind of pioneer this because I can't imagine building an application without Redux. It sounds like a pain. Yeah. So there's a bunch of links here. I'll share the slides, but that's it. Thank you. Questions about Redux, Vue, anything else?
So Redux is a library though, right?
Yes.
But is it being used in Vuex or like is it combined with Vuex?
Their own version of it.
Oh.
You think of Redux as a library that implements Flux.
Right.
Now Vuex follows like the Redux library implementation,
Okay.
so they implement Flux, yeah, in their own way, yeah. So Vuex is their own version of Redux for Vue.
Totally built in.
No, you have to import it.
Import.
But the beauty is, once you import it, that's what we saw here. Once you import it, it comes in with store and all this like actions, getters. Like it will handle all that for you. You don't have to import like, for React like thunks and getters and like all these things that extra libraries added to it. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you had like a component that needed to get data from an API, would you take the components, like the function from the component, and store that data into the Vuex store, and then use it to manipulate
Right.
it with getters and stuff?
Yeah, so I can walk you through it. So like if I wanted to, for example, get the data of the age of the dragon, of the dinosaur. Why I keep calling it dragon? The dinosaur, clearly a different mythological creature. It's a joke, dinosaurs were real. You would, like here, before you mount it, going along with like you want to get so you dispatch an action that would get the age. This action, it'll be one of your actions that you have here. Will commit a mutation, but before that, in here you would make the get request. So we'll get the age from your API. Like we'll do an agex request, and then you'll pass in the age through here to your mutation. Then the mutation would set the age of your store to whatever it will be. So it changes the state of it.
Okay.
Uh,
So
and-
you'd be actually making the API call within Vuex.
Exactly, in the action. The actions are for asynchronous behavior, yeah. Exactly. And then it'll call a mutation. Mutation mutates the state, and then the state reflects automatically for you. Cool.
Will you select those resources that you listed?
I will add, I was recording. Yeah. I'll add the stuff, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me. Slack, GitHub, LinkedIn, email, whatever you feel free.
Give it up for Berto!